welcome to another episode of our Family Law Podcast. Again, we're continuing the series with Ayesha Bhatti, therapist, and today we're going to talk about parenting after divorce and separation and the impact upon the family. So join us today while we discuss this topic. If you have any questions for us, then obviously drop them down below and hopefully we'll pick it up in the next podcast. So, Ayesha, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
How have you been?
I've been good, thank you. Just busy with work and life. And
well, lots of juicy stuff to talk about today.
Yeah.
And parenting after divorce and separation is quite a huge topic, as we know. With the nature of the work that we do, SKB Law, we see a lot of the issues around separating parents and the child getting caught in the middle. So I wanted to discuss with you today, especially in relation to therapy and the work you do, sort of the emotional impact upon any children of separating parents, and hopefully come up with any tools or signposting as to what parents who might find themselves in this situation, can do to help any children in that. So I think I see it obviously on a daily basis where you'll have parents who separate, and more often than not, the child or the children unfortunately get caught in the middle of all that conflict. And we do our best because we try and signpost towards mediation initially and when they come to us to see if they can't resolve it between themselves using a mediator, because that's the least time consuming way of doing it. It is often the cheapest, and also it's a good way of both parents reflecting on behaviours and hopefully the mediator guiding them towards a settlement of how they can manage that in that new situation of two homes and co-parenting successfully together, even though they might have their own differences. But more often than not, we are finding that parents are, especially if one parent is quite aggrieved that the other parent has left the relationship, and use the children as a weapon, I think, for a better word, to try and still trigger that other parent, upset that other parent, make that other parent feel bad for taking that decision for ending that relationship. And we see that the family courts and the social services do the reports for any children's matters are more and more taking into account the impact upon those children with those kind of behaviours, the alienation. I know that the Family Justice Council has just brought out a new definition of what alienation is, because many people were not agreed as to what alienation can be or what it actually is. So I just wanted to hear from you in terms of any experience you've had, either personal or professional, as to how we can best manage that kind of situation where one parent is trying to, for want of another word, hurt the other parent, and the impact it has upon that child.
I think it's a difficult situation because I think it's hard for people to see that they're actually having that impact, because they're in their own pain, they're in a, they're in a grief process, they're in a part of a transition, which can be again really painful, and there's so many emotions involved, isn't it? And I think that sometimes the child's welfare unwittingly kind of gets left out of the picture or neglected in terms of what that child needs within this whole process, because the pain of the parents and the processes and the trauma that they've been through or potentially will go through becomes paramount. And I think the important thing is that children are not weaponized in that. And I do see that with some of the people that come in adulthood and, come for therapy around issues that they've got in adulthood.
Right. Can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah. So I recently had a client who had issues with relationships and attachment. And when we unpicked it, it was very much linked to his parents and his childhood experience of them separating. He was kind of used as a weapon. He was with both parents, so he was living with both parents. He had time with one parent and time with the other. But you know, it was like a yo-yo, and he was an emotional yo-yo. So when he was with mum, he was hearing all this negative stuff about dad. When he was with dad, he was hearing all this negative stuff about mum. And he felt abandoned.
Yeah.
You know, his needs were never taken in. And I remember him saying that he felt like it was his fault, that he'd done something wrong.
I've heard this a lot from young children will say that they blame themselves.
Yeah. For example, if they're naughty or they've got, you know, sometimes there's neurodivergent issues, you know, and sometimes that's undiagnosed at that age, and it's seen as naughtiness or attention seeking. They'll blame themselves for that parent moving or parent splitting up. And that was, in this case, that is exactly what happened. So in his adulthood, he's struggling to have relationships, struggling to trust, still upset and angry at his parents, but conflicted because he loves them.
Loves them both, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But was you, like I said, was weaponized, was used in this kind of battle of wills and resentment between the parents. And he you know, he's really struggling with his own stuff and his own mental health, and really carried that on into adulthood, which is a lot of what I see, you know.
Gosh, I mean, there's so many things that have come out of what you just said in that so when you've got two parents that are in this situation of separation, they are, and sometimes unwittingly, like you said, imposing quite mature relationship issues upon a child. You know, I've even heard them say, well, you know, why did your dad leave? You know, it's like the child hasn't got the answer to that, or it's his fault he left. Everything went bad because your father left. And you're asking a child to give input into something that they're not, I think, emotionally mature to deal with, and forcing that kind of growth, I suppose, in a way that they're not equipped to deal with. But then how, Ayesha, does someone who's in that situation, and it might be that there is no answer to this, when they are going through such a troubled time of a breakdown of a relationship, and it's more specifically so if they didn't want that relationship to end, how is it possible to separate the emotions they feel for that other person, the partner, with the emotions, you know, so they don't overlap onto the child? Is that possible? Are they able to see past that one bit and then think, well, it's not my child's fault. My child needs both parents. He loves both parents. Is that something that can be done quite easily, or does it take work?
I think it just depends on the situation, right? And I've seen people do it really, really well. Yeah. Despite the pain and the conflict and the resentments, you know, they prioritise the child, even if it's just one parent prioritising them. They've prioritised that child's needs, and they've held back on, you know, saying things and doing things that are going to be detrimental, even if it's the truth. Yeah. Sometimes it's, you know, exposing, depending on the age as well, exposing a child to that, of course, the things that they can't process emotionally and developmentally can be more damaging than, you know, not saying anything and just reassuring them and saying it's not your fault, and, you know, we're going to work on this, and, you know, daddy's had to go here, and, you know, just explaining it in an easy, manageable way. It is possible, but you know, that awareness, that self-awareness needs to be there, doesn't it? That understanding that it's okay to be angry and it's okay to be hurt, but that's not for the child to carry. Yeah. And, you know, therapy is one way to do that. Mediation is a brilliant way to do that. Yeah. You know, and having more connections from mediation into therapy. Yeah. So that person can have their own journey of healing. And, you know, maybe at the beginning of a process, as opposed to, because mostly what I see is people coming to therapy when they've hit rock bottom. Oh, okay. You know, that's absolutely, that's okay. That's your process and it's your journey. But there's certain situations where you can help that journey and help the healing. I'm not saying healing should be quick or fast, but help you to manage it, because you know, you're in a process, and like the divorce process, it's not going to stop or wait, is it? It's ongoing. Yeah. So how do you heal within that and attend to someone else's needs, attend to your children's needs. You have to learn that, don't you?
Yeah, you do. You're right. I mean, it is a great tool, therapy. And, honestly, since I've started working with you, more regularly and speaking with you, I just sell it to everybody. I think people are sick of me saying it, saying, oh, you need therapy, you need therapy. Not in a bad way, but just you could be so much better. But there's certain, and it's not them, it's certain issues that are holding them back or down or triggering them. They're embedding them, or they're hiding them away in their minds, or they feel that they've dealt with them. The divorce is over, the paper's been signed, the child goes on certain days to the other parent, and everything is, we're under control. But there'll be a certain situation that'll suddenly trigger those sort of feelings that have been, not, like you say, unresolved. And I see that with so many people. And today, strangely enough, I had a client who'd been a client of mine many years ago and had come back for some sort of additional advice. And she was like a different person. And so I said, you look fantastic. You absolutely look amazing compared to, all I can describe her as when she first came to see me, she looked grey, she just looked, like she was worn down. And today, years later, she looked young, vibrant, full of life. And I said, well done, for getting past the horribleness that you went through. And she said, yeah, I've had therapy.
Amazing.
And you could see that it just shone out of her. And it gave her a better chance at enjoying the rest of her life. And her children are better for it. I think one of her children had some therapy because of the sort of parental separation. But that's when it works. That's when I think it actually works. And I mean, our work can be quite, difficult trying to manage the emotions that a client comes in with, and then navigating them through the legal landscape. That's quite a challenge. Sometimes they won't understand what we're trying to tell them to get to that end point, because all they can see is red mist. They want that other parent to suffer. They're angry at that parent making certain allegations against them even. But the child gets lost in the process. And I see so many judges actually saying to clients, look, you need to focus upon this child who is being caught in the crossfire. There was just a recent case that came out, and parents are separated, and their mother, of her own volition, just moved, quite far away. So the father couldn't see the child regularly, even though they had a bond. I think it was every other weekend or something, they must see each other. And the judge actually gave her short shrift in the judgment to say that you can't undermine the other parent's role because it will impact the welfare of that child. And that has got to be a message that, should be really taken on board by a lot of parents, that notwithstanding your own issues, and this is where you come in, that if it is difficult for you to get past those issues, seek help. There's tools and resources, as well as therapy. There's the GP, there's support networks to try and deal with your issues. But unless there's any safeguarding issues with the child and the other parent, then, the law speaks for itself. Every child has a right to know both parents, and it should be child focused. Any issues should be what is best for the child. But sadly, I can't get through enough to people to say, try a different approach. So, the work we do has an impact upon that family, even the child, for the rest of their life, like you've just explained. So can children get therapy?
Absolutely, yeah. Children can get therapy. There's definitely therapy available for children.
Right, yeah.
And there's different types of therapy.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, based on their kind of developmental age.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely available. And I think it's important as well. I think sometimes, having someone else to be able to talk to and say the things that you want to say without hurting mum or dad's feelings.
Yeah,
and,
good point, that, yeah.
Being able to be honest and not feeling that you're there's going to be some backlash from that, or you're going to hurt someone's feelings, because you are emotionally linked up to your parents, and you want their validation, and you don't want to kind of make them feel worse or worry about how what you say is going to affect your relationship with them, or you're going to be in trouble because of it.
Yeah.
So having their own little space to be able to
like a safe space for them,
to be able to voice that is really important, isn't it? Because I think what people forget in kind of divorce and family breakdown is that it's a bereavement, isn't it? It's a bereavement of a family unit, of expectations of how this family is going to develop and grow together. So there's so much that's, effectively it's died, hasn't it?
Yeah, you're right about that. It is like a grieving process, and I don't suppose enough consideration is given to maybe children that are going through, because someone once explained it to me that when their parents separated, they loved both parents equally, and it was like their whole world had just completely shattered.
Yeah,
but I don't know if parents or enough parents see it like that.
I think it's difficult when you're in that situation of emotional turmoil and pain and going through your own kind of devastation at the loss of what could be or what was, and all the anger and all the emotions that are involved. I think people can overlook that and forget that actually this child's needs need to be paramount, and they need to be put first, because the way an adult can articulate whether we're angry, shouting, swearing, we articulate.
That's true.
Yeah. Children don't have the emotional resources or the development, depending on age, to articulate that, or to even know that they can articulate it. So making that space for children and understanding that actually they're losing out too, and sometimes more so than the parent, because they're losing out on a secure unit of what they thought was,
of course,
their forever home, and now they're going to have two separate homes possibly, a potential step parent, such a change in dynamic.
Yeah.
And sometimes what I've seen is school is their only safe place.
Oh, yeah.
They're okay at school because that's the only constant they've got, because they're coming home and mum's stressed and, there's so much going on, and, they can feel your emotions, and that can cause their behaviour to kind of change as well.
And I think you made a really good point there, because I've worked with a few schools on this in terms of clients, children of clients that go there, and the schools, because of the constants that you just mentioned, the school notice any changes in behaviour, or turning up late to school, or books are missing, or something out of sync for that child. And a lot of schools have started offering additional support within the school, not as a therapist, but like a pastoral teacher that will sit and chat and like you said, give that child that safe space to say, is everything all right? What's do you need to talk about it? So there are tools and resources out there.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you had sort of client that had attachment issues and things like that. What are the, I don't know if symptoms is the right word, but what are the behaviours follow if this kind of issue has happened to someone when they're very young and they've not addressed it?
I think they can manifest in a lot of different ways. Like with children, it can manifest in the behaviour changing. So, acting out, what you'd see is bad behaviour, or the child, not being able to articulate that they're angry, but showing that they're angry.
Yeah, okay.
Just a change in their behaviour and a change in their kind of responses. It can become really withdrawn as well, and not say anything. Because it's a confusing time for them, and processing that. If someone's not telling them that it's okay, and it's okay for you to not know what's going on, and we'll get through this together, and it is a difficult time, and I can see you struggling, but you're safe here, and both of us love you, and if they're not getting that reassurance because the parents haven't got the capacity to give that at that given time, then they're going to internalize things. It can. I've seen kids that their appetite changes, school, they're struggling at school, concentration levels, their friendships. Their friendships start to deteriorate a little bit because they're not able to engage because they're so concerned about what's going on at home. And then with teenagers, it's different. There's probably more angry outbursts.
Okay.
And withdrawal from the family situation, and not being able to understand why they're in that predicament when they've done nothing wrong. So there's so many different ways it can manifest, but you will, people that are close, like you said, schools notice, they will notice.
Yeah.
They will notice because it's a trauma that they're going through.
Yeah, of course. And we have to call it that, don't we? Because
absolutely.
As much as a parent thinks that they can manage it, and even if you haven't got two warring parents, the fact of separation in itself, I think is a huge trauma. And I think that needs to be recognised, that even if they part on, terms which are not acrimonious, they've agreed a co-parenting plan, they seem to be getting on well, maybe it gets overlooked that this young person has their household split into two, and that needs addressing. So what would you suggest then if a parent is, or parents are going through this, or they're contemplating it, or it's happened to them? What steps can a parent do to minimize the collateral damage, or the impact, the emotional sort of impact upon any children of any relationship that ends?
I think it's trying to keep consistency within the relationship, regardless of what they're going through. A lot of reassurance, keeping the routines the same. Children need structure regardless of what's going on. And it's important that they're having the emotional upheaval that can't be avoided at times, but making sure that their routine stays the same. They're not kind of missing out on clubs and activities.
So keeping it as normalised as possible.
Trying to keep it as normalised as possible. So there's the least impact, and trying to reassure the child that it's not their fault, and trying to have both parents involved in keeping as much normality as possible, because it is inevitable that they're in the verge or process or have split up, but limiting the impact, it is absolutely possible by making sure that the child is understood and their needs are taken into account. But obviously that's kind of difficult when there's turmoil within the parents.
Maybe even talking to other children that have gone through something similar, because they get it, they understand the situation. Because I've seen that within friends and family that I know, that if that child's going through something, an older child usually who's been through something like that will try and reassure them that look, we've been through this, and you will be all right in the whole process. From our point of view as lawyers, the advice we give to anyone who's in this situation is that if you are contemplating a formal divorce, for example, rather than a separation, then try and deal with the child arrangements issues first. Try and deal with them initially out of court. Court is a last resort. We don't want children with having court orders placed upon them. The courts do not want to intervene unless it's a really, really last resort. Often we find a knee-jerk is, I'm going to court, I'm going to make an application, and it should be the final thing if nothing else can resolve it, like you say, mediation, therapy, any other kind of support. And so if someone comes to us with, well, I want a divorce and my children, we need some kind of order in place or agreement in place, we would often say to them, we should maybe look to sorting the children's arrangements out first as to time they'll spend with either parent or each parent, where they'll live, that kind of thing, because then it's more child focused. Whereas if we're dealing with the divorce and finances, that starts to overtake everything, and it starts to influence, if they're not getting what they want in the finances, then the children are sort of held back a little bit from enjoying time with the other parent. So we'll always give the advice first that let's try and sort the children's arrangements out first.
And I think that's so it's really positive that you do that, because you're implicitly directing the focus straight to the children straight away. And like, what I'm saying about the children being at the heart of the, whatever's going on, their needs should be first. That's exactly what you're doing.
We hope so. We do find it works as well. If someone takes our advice on that, it does work. But I want to move on to something you mentioned just earlier, was step parents or new partners of parents. You know, once a relationship's over. And I don't know if a fan is the right word, but if you watch the Dubai Bling series, I mean, it's on in our house.
I haven't, but since you've mentioned it, I am going to start.
You're going to watch that episode. Yeah. So it was on, and one of my team actually said, "Oh, there's an episode where this is what happens," and essentially it was a cast member who had been divorced and gone through a divorce, and they had one child. I think she's called Farhana, and the child has autism and some other learning needs, and they've obviously established a co-parenting sort of arrangement because the child sees his father regularly and lives with mom, and everything seems okay. But then there's a point in the episode that father wants to introduce his new partner. He's got a new long-term partner, and he wants to introduce his son to this partner. Obviously, when he's seeing his child, he wants, his new partner to be there. And the whole drama is around Farhana being adamant, come what may, you will not introduce our son to your new partner. And there was a horrible scene I think they'd gone to try and discuss it and sort it out using her sister as a mediator. And they'd gone to some play gym. And this child, who's so gorgeous, a lovely little boy, was playing on the climbing frames or whatever he was doing. And mum and dad in front of him were having this conversation. And I know it was probably dramatized for TV, but the child was there. So if that's drama, that I don't know what issues that child is going to have remembering that this was played out in front of a camera. But she was adamant that she would not allow him to meet the new partner of his father. And I just felt, to a point, I can understand because it's a touchy subject. It triggers your relationship and the fact that it ended. But when it starts damaging or having an emotional impact upon that child, which you could tell it clearly was, even though he was busy doing what he was doing, he was very much aware of what was happening. Yeah, that's when I think it's gone too far. So what can people do to manage those kind of situations?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it, to manage that, because it's all about the intentions and where that's coming from. But ultimately, it's about what that child wants, and it's unrealistic to think that if the child's got a relationship with either parent and they've got a new partner, that at some point it's unrealistic to think that they're never going to meet. Absolutely. Because at some point there's going to be an overlap and they're going to need to meet if they're having a relationship with a parent. And I think that it's about trying to manage the needs of the child and what the child wants with what's realistic and what will ultimately be achievable long term. And taking your own kind of upset and anger, which is really hard. We're all human and we all have that, but again, it's got to be about what that child needs and explaining. You can't just throw a child into a dynamic with a new parent. It has to be done sensitively, and explained age appropriately.
Absolutely.
And when the time's right, and both parents need to have that patience and understand it has to happen, but it's got to be when that child's ready and when the time is right. And, talking to the child about what they want and how they'd feel, and working with the child as well, because in that situation, they're just doing what they want. Yeah. They're just thinking about themselves. Yeah. She's clearly upset and hurt, and he's obviously moved on. That can be really difficult for the other partner. It's a shock. It's the real kind of cementing of this is gone, this is broken. Yeah.
Well, it begs the question that, is this really about the child or is this about you?
Yeah. And I think that's important, isn't it, to reflect on, and because ultimately the child should be able to have a relationship with both parents. Yeah. And one shouldn't withhold that right from the child, because ultimately you're their voice, especially when they're younger.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
And take your own needs out of it. And it's hard when you're in the heat of the mess. So I think having kind of family get involved or someone external that knows you both and can okay, it's maybe, not a mediator per se, but someone who knows the family and can, objectively say, actually, maybe this is what your child will need, maybe not now, but at some point. Yeah. So why don't we work towards that, building the child up to, okay, Dad's got a new partner and maybe one day you meet them. Yeah. And how would you feel about that? So, unpicking that child's feelings, because they might not be ready themselves.
Absolutely.
But it is hard, isn't it, to get to that point when you're really upset and angry. So
it's really hard.
Sometimes we need the help of family and friends. Yeah. People that can be objective.
Yeah.
And say, this is really difficult for you. We can see that. And I can see why you're upset that person's moved on, but what about the child? Because they still need to have that relationship.
That does happen to a point when applications are made to court, because if the court can see that these parents are just not seeing what the focus is for the child, or should be, or what would be in the best interests of the child, then the court then appoints a guardian for that child, which is sort of your objective person who's a voice for the child, like you said, and can do exactly what you've just said. But when it's done well, it's incredibly successful. Yeah. I've had families that both partners have moved on and got new partners in their lives. And, I remember a client once came to me and said, I don't know what to do about this situation. The other parent wants to see the child, but I'm not sure about the new partner, but I've now found a partner. So it's all a bit confusing. Do I say no to their partner, but expect them to agree to mine? And I remember having a conversation distinctly and said, look, if you all have got this child's interests at heart, isn't it better that that child has 4 parents that love and care for it? And that child would thrive in that environment, So look at it like you've kept saying throughout this. It's got to be what's best for the child. And if all parents are providing a loving, safe environment, a thriving environment that encourages and gives that child the support it needs, then that child is going to do so much better than having all this kind of antagonism, alienation, acrimonious, all the A words that you can think of. And it is like you said, people should speak to people that know them and say, look, this is a situation I'm going through. What's your view? Whether they take that advice is a different story.
And, ultimately it's about them seeing that what are we teaching our children? How are we teaching them to manage conflict? Conflict resolution. How are we teaching them to do that? Are we teaching them in a way to be angry and resentful and, have hits and digs at the other person, because this is how we should deal with resolution. So there is where it goes well with families and they manage it well, it is where they've managed the conflict, and found, positive ways to resolve that conflict. Yeah. And the children are always watching and learning and picking up on that. Yeah. And the healthier you can do that, the less trauma and impact there is on the child.
You make a really good point there, Ayesha, because I've always been told, and I have seen myself, that, how does a child, it's learned behaviour, right? Course, how do they learn how to deal with certain situations in life? How do they respond to certain and react to certain situations in life? And it's, my mum used to say something in Punjabi that the kids are a map of their parents, and I never understood it. But then as I got older, I did understand it, because when they're with you, when you're parenting them and bringing them up in your environment, they don't know how to do certain things or react or behave. They're watching how you do it. Yeah. So if a parent realizes that, however, they're watching me now deal with this situation, you don't want your children to grow up and not be able to manage relationships or have difficult relationships. So, and I know, like you say, we're only human. You've got to be super clever to, when you're going through something really awful, to think, oh, it's okay, I'll put my feelings on the side, but, I'm going to put my child first, which they should, but it's not, it's easier said than done.
Of course it is. Yeah. Of course it is. You struggle with that situation yourself, but, ultimately we're instilling values in our children, aren't we? We're wanting them to have the same values that ultimately we have, or
even better than us, I suppose.
Yeah, and to be able to manage situations and to be able to see that things can go wrong, because in life things break down, things go wrong, but how we manage that and how we deal with that is so crucial to childhood development.
You
know, and for them
absolutely true.
You know, because no one can say, oh, you'll never get divorced, and that's wrong, because life happens, you know. We know Islamically it happens. We've given guidance on how to deal with it when it happens. So it's a natural part of a marriage. Sometimes they break down, and that's okay. But I think ultimately it's how we deal with that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, from what I've seen in family and breakdowns and, you know, trauma of a breakdown, even in close family members, how it can impact them throughout their whole, you know, adulthood. And it's not something that we should take lightly. It's something, and I'm glad you said that the courts will appoint a guardian. And I've heard that in a lot of situations where the parents just can't get you know, they can't find a resolution. They just can't see past their own pain, hurt, whatever it is, and whatever it looks like. Because I'm so glad that happens. Otherwise, you know, the child just gets lost in the process and has to manage their own feelings and everything themselves, and that's detrimental.
It really is. Honestly speaking, if you were to
they didn't ask for that, did they?
No, absolutely. That's the thing, they didn't. And if you were to ask me, Sarah, how many cases of yours do you see where that actually happens, I would have to say, in the majority of cases, I feel that parents have lost sight, especially when the name of the application is a children's application, but they lose sight of what the child's needs are, what's best for the child's welfare, what's in the best interest. It's all about being heard that the other partner did this to them, and being adamant that because of that, they should not be allowed to see the children, because the children have become a victim in that whole process. Yes, where there's safeguarding concerns, there are things put in place by courts and orders that can be made to protect the victims, you know, albeit the parent and the children. But, you know, let's not get ahead of ourselves and start using these where they're not needed, where they are, you know, out and out just designed to sidetrack the application process and divert attention away from what is actually important, which is the child's needs, to what they're trying to do, which is to get one over the other parent for leaving the relationship or finding someone new in that relationship. And I'm sad to say that you know, I do feel that happens in the majority of cases. So we're I think for time wise, what I want to just, I think, end with is from you, Ayesha. I'd love to hear some advice to anyone who's listening to this, who's in that situation, that they're either contemplating separation and they are worried about the children. You will have heard so many times, as much as I have, that I've stayed in this relationship for the children. And I hear that so many times, that I wanted to leave this relationship many years ago, but I've stayed for the children. And if they're in that situation, if they're contemplating separation, what words of advice, or maybe like 3 tips, can you give them to say, well, if this is your situation, how they can minimize any impact upon the children?
I think when someone's in that situation and they've decided that, or they're thinking about that, you know, leaving or not being there anymore, if they're impacted, the children are going to be impacted.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Children are really sensitive, they're really perceptive, and their feelings see whatever is projected, so they will be picking up on that. So it's about, you know, putting your needs first, but at the same time as a child, because they go hand in hand a lot of the time. If there's conflict in that relationship, sometimes it's not the most healthiest environment. It can be a really toxic environment for the child, and they might not say anything, they might not manifest it, but, you know, it is about understanding that sometimes you do have to leave that relationship, and that's okay, but there's got to be a way to minimize the damage and not make it, you know, hell for everyone. And especially the child, because ultimately they can feel like they're losing the most, because they're losing their family home, they're losing, you know, a system that they're used to. an unclear future. You know, what's that going to mean for them? Who are they going to live with? You know, it's just so much turmoil for them. But, you know, you can't stop and stay in a relationship if it's feeling like unmanageable or unlivable. Absolutely. But it's always got to be trying to manage the child's needs first.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's my professional experience and my professional opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's so important because they kind of, like you've alluded to so much, that they get left out and lost in the process.
So from a practical point of view, what steps can they take to make it easier for themselves, if that's the right word?
I think getting support, getting support. There's always, obviously therapy is an option. There's other groups available. I can't remember the names, so I was Googling stuff this morning, and I was reading quite a few articles and support groups available for people who are contemplating it or going through that process. There was so many resources for support for children, for parenting tips. You know, there was so much on the internet. And local stuff as well. So I think just look into, before you start a process, you know, just look into the maybe research that's done on it, groups that are available, just so you're more informed about what you're going to go through, what you're going to experience, what you're going to feel, what are the possible outcomes for the child. Because there's so much research. And like I said, I was reading some stuff over the last few weeks about how divorce and how separation impacts a child and the statistics around it. And that can really inform your choices and awareness around, oh my God, this could happen to my child. So what can I do to just be aware of that, so you can mitigate some of that risk by being aware of it, that actually they can get impacted like that. Children can. Yeah. You know. And
maybe try and, if it's possible, work with the other parent and say, look, this, you know, it's inevitable, or if you've made your decision, then tell the child together, like you said. That might, if they can see that the parents are okay with it, that might help them to be okay with it. And you know, kind of deliver that message as a unit, even though obviously you start in this process, or you're going through a process of divorce. But like you said, that connectivity and singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, will show that child that actually it's not a nice situation, but mum and dad seem to be doing it okay. That's all right. So it'll reduce their worry and their sense of insecurity in that situation if mum and dad are handling it. I mean, behind the scenes, they might want to kill each other, but I think they mostly do 90% of the time.
And I think, like you were saying about the Dubai bling, you know, doing that in front of children, it you know, it's not something that should be done.
Honestly, I was completely shocked. And I've seen, you know, the sort of reality TV where there is this kind of, you know, parental sort of crossfire going on in front of children. And I just think it does so much damage to a child. And like you said earlier, the learned behaviour. And this situation where you're saying that if both parents can speak to the child together, honestly, it's such a great skill to teach that young child that in the future, if you come across a situation, this is how you deal with it. You know, so you're turning it on its head and saying, okay, well, we haven't, you know, being successful at managing this relationship to where we would like it to be. Doesn't mean to say you're bad people. I mean, that's a really important thing that I always say to clients, that you are not a bad person for wanting to leave a relationship. You are two probably good people that just aren't good together anymore. You know, it's just the way to see it. And from my point of view, if someone comes to us, I would say similar to you, is just do a lot of research. I mean, do a lot of reading around what your rights are. A lot of parents, especially fathers, come to us and they say, you know, we were told that if we didn't do A, B, C, and D in the relationship, or if we left, then we would never see our children again. You know, they can't do that unless it's, like I said, safeguarding issues. Then, you know, a child has a right to know both parents. So that's one of the first things I would say, is that, you know, do your research, know your rights, take some advice from a solicitor if you need to. But we would always signpost them first initially to try and deal with it through family and friends if there is somebody like that. Often there's not, but if there is someone that can mediate effectively between the two of you, that's going to be the best case scenario. And then there's brilliant mediators out there. We use a lot, and a lot of them are online. It's not like you're sitting in a room together and then firing accusations against it. It doesn't work like that.
And they're skilled in that.
Highly skilled.
They're skilled in mediation.
Skilled. They really know what they're doing. And they can get you both to come to an arrangement that suits you both. You know, it's an opportunity for you to say what you feel as well, but they are, like you said, very skilled at directing you towards what's right for the child or the children. And then if all that fails, then obviously there's legal advice, there's solicitors. That again, you can go to a solicitor and not have to make an application to court. Not everything has to go to court. You can, if you are really not getting anywhere through mediation, then a solicitor can maybe, write some letters to the other party or the other party's solicitors and suggest what could be a good arrangement for the children and why, put it down in that way. And then obviously the worst case scenario is make an application to court if you're absolutely stuck. So, I think to finish off I think from me, I just want to say one thing about what you mentioned earlier. And it's what you were saying about how you react to a situation, okay? And I went to a dinner the other night, and Zara Mohammed, who was the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, it was her farewell dinner. She was stepping down, and she's a brilliant speaker. And one of the sort of things that she said during her speech was that success isn't what you achieve, it's who you become in the process. So if that helps anyone out there to think, this is not a game where you win. Because there's a child in the middle of all of this. And if you want to achieve success, which is that the child comes out of this situation the least amount of war wounds possible, then, think about that. Think about, what lessons you're giving to the child and how you react to certain things. So that's probably what I would leave sort of our listeners with. But over to you.
I totally agree with that. I think it's a difficult situation. It's not nice for anyone, but if we can do it in the least abrasive way, where we all, are less wounded at the end of it, and especially the children, I think, there are lessons to be learned in that.
Yeah. And you were saying that there's different kinds of therapy depending on the age of the child. Are those services readily accessible? Do you do child therapy yourself?
I work with a certain age group, but there are people that work with younger children, and sometimes you can get that through school. There's educational psychologists. There is referrals that can be done through school and things like that. So there's lots of resources out there.
Great.
It's just when you're aware of the child needing something or...
That's the first step, I suppose. Okay, well, thank you for that, Ayesha. So if you want to get in touch with Ayesha, it's ayeshatherapy.com. Is that right? Ayesha.therapy.com.
That's it,
and if you want to get in touch with us, it's sarah@skblawfirm.co.uk. Till next time.